Welcome to Day 3 of the 2020 ERI Summit and MTO Symposium. Joining us on the virtual stage, Under-Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, the Honorable Ellen Lord.
I am here today with Adam Boehler to start a conversation about the DoD microelectronics industrial base and supply chain. I believe the U.S. microelectronics industry is at an inflection point. The following questions must be answered. How does DoD ensure a secure and resilient microelectronics supply chain? One that can scale from legacy to state of the present to state of the art. What role does the U.S. government play in enabling a reliable domestic microelectronics industrial base for national security and technological objectives, such as 5G networks, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Things, as well as key industrial sectors, such as medical, transportation, and industrial controls? What factors contributed to U.S. microelectronics designs being offshored for fabrication, packaging, and testing, along with significant manufacturing know-how? How do we reverse this trend? What immediate steps can we take to move out on a path to meet our goals in the short term? What about the long term? Everything we do at DoD is under the framework of the National Defense Strategy and its 3 lines of effort: lethality, strengthening alliances and partnerships, and reforming the way we do business. We measure our progress in terms of readiness and modernization. My customer is the warfighter, and my responsibility is to leverage DoD's ability to convene industry and government officials and organizations in order to develop lethal warfighting capability and to field this capability to our forces as well as our partners and allies. A key enabler for generating both readiness and modernization is to rethink how we harness the nation's technical innovation and business know-how to regenerate a domestic microelectronics industrial base that captures commercial practices to produce components and devices with a known pedigree, and then transition to a zero-trust capability. Today, the U.S. invests in research, development, and design, while foreign countries financially benefit from microelectronics production. U.S. dependency on offshore suppliers is a growing national security risk. Our U.S. industrial base is the nexus of national security and economic security. I am proposing a step-by-step process for reconstituting the U.S. microelectronics supply chain. A&S believes the development of domestic microelectronics capability should be focused by segment: memory devices, DRAM; logic, integrated circuits, state-of-the-art, SOTA; advanced packaging and test, AP&T; logic, IC, state-of-the-present and legacy; complex analog devices, AD converters, mixed digital, etc.; memory, NAND. While DoD does not drive the microelectronics market, as we only constitute roughly 1% of demand, we can drive significant R&D, and we have the power to convene thought leaders, such as we're doing here today, and establish public-private partnerships that provide a framework for further commercial growth. We can lead and influence how technology can be leveraged to manufacture components, subsystems, and platforms to address our most challenging applications. In turn, multiple industries can benefit from our Pathfinder projects and sustain them long-term. Due to a variety of market factors, including environmental regulations, local, state, and federal taxes, wage pressure, cost, availability, and lack of a skilled workforce, many of our country's industrial supply chains, which constitute core capabilities, have moved offshore. Over time, our ability to ensure the pedigree of key building blocks of our technological superiority, such as microelectronics, has eroded. While we still design components, FPGA, ASIC circuits, and printed circuit cards in the U.S., the majority of fabrication, packaging, testing, etc., is done offshore. we can no longer clearly identify the pedigree of our microelectronics. Therefore, we can no longer ensure that backdoors, malicious code, or data exfiltration commands aren't embedded in our code. While we developed the ability to identify the technical path to ensure all components, circuits, and systems are clean, regardless of their manufacturing location, we need to find a path to domestic sources to provide a secure and resilient supply of legacy, state-of-the-present, and state-of-the-art microelectronics. I believe that we in defense need to lead. Working with my colleagues in the administration, both inside and outside of DoD, we are charting a path forward to bring microelectronics fabrication, packaging, and testing back to the U.S. in order to ensure a secure and resilient microelectronics supply chain. We will continue to evolve our technical capability to move to zero trust to better meet our security needs. I will now turn it over to Jeff Nadaner, our DASD for Industrial Policy, who will tee up today's fireside chat between Adam Boehler and myself. Adam is from the Development Finance Corporation. Thank you.
Very good. We are here today to talk about microelectronics, U.S. national competitiveness, and the Defense Department. I am Jeb Nadaner, the DASD for Industrial Policy, in the Acquisitions and Sustainment component of OSD. I am pleased to have here as for the conversation, Ellen M. Lord, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. You know about her, but I want to say one thing. She spent a career working at every level connecting the Defense Department and the dynamic aspects of the private sector to meet our needs. And she's done it at every level, from the field as a chemist up to CEO of Textron. One of her charges to her staff has been to promote the President's policies on the National Defense Strategy, as well as reshoring certain capabilities. And in this regard, she's advocated very strong partnership with our interagency partners. So today we have here Adam Boehler, the CEO of the Development Finance Corporation. Adam also has spent a career working the private sector, several startups, job growth, and in government. So we have here a very special group for a conversation on microelectronics. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First question I have is, where do we stand as a country on microelectronics, and more particularly the department?
Great question. So I believe we're really at an inflection point. We develop an enormous amount of intellectual property, if you will, here in the United States, designing microelectronics. However, about 75% of that goes offshore to be produced, and about 95% of it is packaged and tested offshore. So we have an opportunity, I think, with the realization that we need to have more domestic capability. COVID has highlighted that for us. I believe we're at an inflection point where we need to, as government, partner with industry to begin to reshore some of that capability. And Adam and his team are going to help us with that in terms of looking at all the different financial tools we can use.
How did we get here as a country? What's changed over 30 years?
Policy, regulations. I think we have unfortunately begun to over-regulate a lot of our industries, and environmental constraints, safety constraints, wages, taxes. It's driven the cost up in terms of our microelectronics, and industry has moved offshore for a competitive solution. That's what we need to reverse.
What does some of the solution look like?
So I think that we represent one part of the solution. And so the way to think about the Development Finance Corporation is like America's bank. We've been investing for decades internationally on behalf of development and foreign policy. And one of the lessons so far in this pandemic is that there are critical industries where we need to have a presence. That's been clear. I think you saw it in ventilators. Thank God we had the ability to produce so many ventilators so quickly, and that was because of American manufacturing prowess. And so one of the lessons here is to be thoughtful so that that doesn't happen again in other industries. And so DoD, when they were looking for solutions, they had the ability to make loans and asked us to partner and essentially become kind of a loan processor for the Department of Defense using the Defense Production Act. And so our role, we're a piece of the solution, is to provide loans to support the reshoring of critical areas of supply so that we don't end up in another situation.
How does microelectronics relate to the National Defense Strategy?
Microelectronics are a foundational building block of most of our systems. And we have an issue in terms of not only defending the nation, but making sure that we are secure in terms of everything happening here. If we have offshore supplies of microelectronics, we open ourselves up to the vulnerability of having backdoors and malicious code and so forth. And frankly, the control of our DoD systems can be lost. Our critical information can be lost. So we have to start with the fundamentals and make sure that we understand the pedigree of what we have, the functionality. It's very much the same as in a lot of other key industries in the United States and worldwide, where they need a secure, trusted supply. So we believe DoD can bring attention to the issue, talk about how we make our systems secure through microelectronics, and then share that with the rest of the country.
Now, what does the business model look like to address something like microelectronics?
I think we're in a unique position to look potentially at some private-public partnerships where the U.S. government can provide a demand signal and can also infuse some capital to overcome the activation energy, if you will, to get the whole process rolling of manufacturing, packaging, testing here in the States. And then we partner with other industrial sectors to sustain that. And we have a pretty strong demand signal in order to be able to do that.
I'd note that the fundamental reason and situation that pushed manufacturing offshore is no longer the same given where technology is. I mean, I look at microelectronics, and this is an area where luckily the United States still leads in terms of intellectual property, in terms of design. Well, when labor was much more of an arbitrage, before you saw things move as well as because of regulations, as you said. But now you look at manufacturing technology, and it's become more important that you're invested in automation technology, in next generation manufacturing. So that labor arbitrage is significantly decreasing. And I think what DoD and we want to partners look at is, one, private market can bring it back if it's triggered, and we want to help to support and trigger that. And we are one aspect, which is loans and capital there. There's other aspects around demand signals, advanced purchases, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But I think the nice thing here is what may not have been sustainable 15, 20, 25 years ago from a manufacturing process because of technology is sustainable.
Yeah, and that very technology to automate uses microelectronics
right.
as well. And so industrial controls are a core capability for the entire nation, but particularly for us in defense as we are producing the more exquisite sensors and weapons and so forth. So we have the need and we have the capability to fund some of that development, but in order to sustain it and have a viable business case, we need the rest of the nation. So we think there are many that are interested if we lead the way and figure out how to get it going.
What kind of incentives does industry need given its interest in reshoring?
I think you have the regulatory side, and I know that the administration is looking at regulatory relief where it's appropriate. There's state and local incentives that we can work from a state perspective to provide. I always find it interesting to look at where do you have particular expertise in a state. I think about New Mexico with Los Alamos and what DoD does there. So where are there already areas of expertise that make sense? And then I think what DFC can do is serve as a spark. We don't provide grants. These aren't, give-outs. They're low-cost, private market-driven solutions where we can provide a spark to let something come back and then drive towards sustainability.
And DoD not only drives research and development, but we also work on developing the workforce of the future we need. So if we really have an all-of-government approach here, we can partner with our other government agencies and together fund schools in terms of education, whether that be trade schools, whether that be colleges, whether those be graduate schools, to develop the workforce we need to be able to deal with the automation to produce these, to continue to design. So if you take a holistic approach, I think we can create a sustainable microelectronics industry. But it's not just about that first plant with some equipment in it. It's about the workforce. It's about all the policy nationally to make this attractive.
DoD has many needs when it comes to microelectronics. Do you want to delineate just a few of the different types of needs that DoD has?
Well, we have a variety of different types. I'll say, for instance, think of our fighter aircraft and think of all of the different circuits in there, all the ASICs, all the FPGAs. We have the need to make those systems fly. We have the need to be able to process and fuse sensor data, turn it into information and knowledge, and pass it along. So we need it for the systems we produce. Sensor capability is very, very important to us. This, again, is fundamentally on microelectronics. So we have it for the systems we produce. We also need it for the production capability to do that as well. So it's all different levels of the supply chain, from the 50-cent different components up to the very, very elegant printed circuit boards that are populated.
So an additional dimension to it also is there's the systems we want in the future, that we need as a future, cutting edge.
Yeah.
And then there's also the systems that we have now that we're going to be using for many, many decades.
So you can segment this, if you will, into legacy systems that we have to sustain because we have a huge fielded capability. We have those that we are developing now, and we have future needs. And we want to make sure that we have access to the legacy technology, to the state of the present, and then state of the art. So we need to be able to sustain that spectrum. And when we talk about production facilities, we want to have the flexibility to do all three.
One thing I'd add is, the applications, obviously, and I'll connect it to the pandemic that we're in right now. One of the areas where we're advancing the most is on new testing technology. I know Undersecretary Lord is involved there too. And people don't immediately think about the importance of microelectronics in the context of this pandemic, but how direct those new technologies are driving some of these new custom testing systems, et cetera. So I think the administration has to look at things that are very clearly direct. Are we making enough N95 masks? But actually be thoughtful and say, well, what is the manufacturing capability that's making those N95 masks? And do we have enough tests? How are we making those novel tests? And if we don't see that second component, the microelectronics, and we are vulnerable there, then it won't matter how much cloth you have if you can't make a mask or a next generation test.
And I think we need to always remember that economic security and national security are very tightly interrelated, and our industrial base is really the nexus of the two. So it's very much a virtuous cycle if we can really re-energize and reshore an industry that's very significant in terms of the number of jobs, high quality jobs.
Yeah, this seems to be a question of national defense and also national competitiveness and the kind of living standards we'll have here. What does sustainability look like? What does it mean when we talk about sustainability of something like microelectronics or some other advanced capability we're investing in?
I think we're always looking for private market from a DFC perspective to lead. And so it's one thing to say, listen, we have a policy goal for our national security to ensure against a pandemic that we have what I like to think of, you buy electricity from the grid, but you always have your generator there. You're never fully reliant on other countries for something that you need. I think that's an important lesson. But at the same time, we don't want to prop up industries forever. That's not appropriate. It's not what we do, and that doesn't create sustainability. So sustainability to me is identifying a policy gap, putting together the right tools so that private market can succeed. So if we're coming in, that's going to be one of the questions we're always looking at is, one, is it going to continue? And part of that is because we're focused on taxpayer dollars, and we need to protect taxpayer dollars, one of the important elements. But another part of it is, if you aren't doing that, then it may not be around a decade from now, et cetera. And so that's always part of the business plan.
Another vector on that is looking at how we stand up capability and make sure that we build facilities that can adapt to future technologies. So again, we've got this mix of legacy, state of the present, state of the art. We don't want to construct something that will be useful from a relevancy point of view for 3 or 5 years. We want to make sure we have the capability to scale along with the growth of the technology and make sure we sustain it in all these other ways as well. So it really, this is where it takes a lot of brains around the table to do this correctly. And this is one of the areas where I think government can really partner with industry to hear what they need to make a business sustainable. And we can work with all the resources we have to partner with them to really be a catalyst to get it going. But as Adam said, then we step back and private industry is the one who's moving forward to sustain it into the future.
If you'd share a final thought you want to leave with all of the technologists and folks working on the government side and industry side at this conference, something that they should remember as they go to think about microelectronics in the future.
I would just say that we need all the brains out there, both from the technology side and the business side, and we need to hear your ideas. Often people talk about government as this kind of big blob, but there aren't individuals, people in the government they know to come to. I'm asking, from my point of view, please come to our industrial policy team within acquisition and sustainment in the department. We are very, very interested in microelectronics, not only for defense, but for all the different industrial segments in the nation.
I'd add that you have partners in government that have made it clear that microelectronics is critical to our national security and defense strategy. And our job at DFC is to be full supporters in that. So our doors are open. We're interested in looking in private market-driven deals that are sustainable, and we'll be working very closely with the Department of Defense here. So we're excited.
I want to thank you, each of you, for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.